The War of the Rohirrim introduced at Annecy Film Festival. The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim was introduced at the Annecy Film Festival. An exciting, first look for The War of the Rohirrim came from the Warner Brothers panel at the Annecy International Animated Film Festival in France. Depending on your knowledge of the story of the character of Helmut Tokmakel and whether you follow the news so far, this news may contain spoilers for you. The War of the Rohirrim introduced at Annecy Film Festival. The War of the Rohirrim became one of the most prominent events of the Annecy Film Festival. In his presentation of The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, director Kenji Kamiyama, Ghost in the Shell, stand-alone complex, he emphasized the dimensions of the project he undertook, combining the enormous details of J.R.R. Tolkien's fantasy series and the aesthetics of Western and Eastern animation. Produced by Jason DeMarco, Senior Vice President of Action and Anime Productions at Warner Brothers Discovery, and executive produced by Philippa Boyens, one of the writers of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the film is an animated film designed independently of the story of the One Ring or Sauron. The origins of the story are reflected in the source material, with only a few passages from Appendix A of the Lord of the Rings, particularly the House of Yerl chapter. The story takes place in the legendary castle of the Lord of the Rings, Helm's Deep, during the reign of Helm's Hammer, voiced by Brian Cox, King of Rohan. For new information from the War of the Rohirrim. 1. The story will be about the ruins of war. The War of the Rohirrim crew did not hesitate to give details of the plot, and the team gave candid comments about the movie. Boyens described the main plot of the War of the Rohirrim as a story about the ruins of war. Also, one of the biggest battles comes at the end of the first act. And where can you go from that point? Boyens also mentioned the war-oriented nature of the movie. Saying that this emphasis of writer Boyens helped shape the story, director Kamiyama stated that there was a story about supernatural grief on the subject, which he compared to a ghost story. 2. The film will be told mostly through the eyes of an unknown character. While Helm Nob, whose name we are familiar with from Helm's Deep Castle, is a familiar character for Lord of the Rings fans, the hero of the movie will be a lesser-known character. Up to this point, this character has only been referred to as Helm's daughter in Tolkien's appendix and will be referred to as Hera in the movie. The film will be told through the eyes of Hera, voiced by Gaia Wise. Stating that they chose this character for purely pragmatic reasons, Boyens adds, everyone else dies except this character. But she also states that they chose the character of Hera because they thought she was a representative of a feudal, patriarchal warrior culture and a more interesting figure than following a figure that only vaguely exists in the texts. Creative team. The gaps in the story are filled according to the early Anglo-Saxon period inspired by Tolkien. Hera herself was inspired by Ethelflaed, Lady of the Mercians, a similarly buried figure in British history. Other characters, such as the main antagonist Wolf, are more defined by Tolkien's text, but the creative team still added their own visual interpretation to it. He's doing pretty bad things, so it better look good, Kamiyama says of feedback from the design team. 3. Returning to a few familiar locations from Peter Jackson's trilogy. In redesigning what these spaces would look like, set nearly 200 years ago, the team had to figure out how to ensure visual consistency with the film series. To do this, they consulted the Weta workshop. They pulled old CG models of the venues from their archives and showed them to designer David Falconer. In addition, John Howe, who worked on the concept and design level on the film, and illustrator Alan Lee, who worked as a concept designer on Jackson's original trilogy, are among the consultants. When Boyens talked about his decision to produce the anime for The Lord of the Rings, he talks about his desire for a more realistic animation style. But he adds that they also question putting characters we already know into a new setting. That's why the team tried to strike a balance between visual consistency and creating something that felt unique. Helmut itself seems to be the visual basis for this at the character level, embracing a highly detailed art style leaning towards realism. 4. A lot of effort was put into the animation of the horses. One of the biggest challenges stemmed from nature as the horse lords of Rohan and the sheer number of horses the team had to draw, and drawing just one was a lot of work, according to Joseph Chow's comment. The animation team was sent to a horse farm just for the design of the horses. In addition, CG animation is used as a placeholder. Unreal Engine is used to simulate scenes and experiment with different camera angles. For the final result, hand-drawn animation was used. Similar methods have been tried for human characters as well. CG models, live-action references, and real-time simulation are combined for animators to interpret. To highlight how these methods work in harmony, 2 special clips were shown at the War of the Rohirrim Annecy Film Festival for the purpose of showing the animation sketch. The film begins by leaning on visual familiarity with traditional Lord of the Rings voiceovers and a weathered map shot, moving on to a camera shot that mimics Jackson's sense of scale and homage to the mountainous landscape as Hera rides through the rocky hills. The second sequence is calmer but also heavily populated with characters speaking in the halls of Edoras and includes some of the aforementioned placeholders. Kamiyama says the project is one of his biggest works ever. The new animation will be based on Tolkien's Lord of the Rings books and will focus on the legendary kings Helm Knocker and Helm's Deep in the history of Rohan. Helmut Tokmakel, born in the year 2691 of the Third Age, became king in 2741 at the age of 50. Its rule has passed through wars. In the animation, we will see the events that probably led to his taking the name Tokmakel, his defeat at Isen Pass, his refuge in Helm's Deep, which would later be named after him, and the siege process there. In the long winter of 2758, we'll see the moment when the war horn is sounded and Helm and his men go on raids on the Dunlendings. 1 or 2 characters we know from the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit movies can be in this movie. Most likely one of these characters is Saruman. The War of the Rohirrim will be 130 minutes, as stated at the Annecy Film Festival. The movie will be released in theaters on April 12, 2024.